Hello and welcome. Today is April 19th, 2020, and today's study I want to delve deeper into the whole porneia issue. I did a video a few days ago regarding the term arsenokoites, which is translated as homosexuals, and I was showing in this video that based on the etymology of arsen and koite, this rather reflects the behavior of man laying burdens on other people, similar to the words of Jesus Christ. So this is where I'm going to start delving into a continuation of this study. Matthew 23 verse 4, for they, and that is the Pharisees, bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. And you might want to go back and watch that video if you wonder how I can come up with such an interpretation. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. Today I chose the format to do a screen recording just because I think it might be a little bit easier to go through all this material. I prepared a few screenshots just because it's such an exhaustive topic. Now, as far as the term porneia goes, I have picked 1 Corinthians 7 verse 23, and that says, you were bought at a price, and do not become slaves of men. And so this is the pivot point for this study, that porneia, as we will see, means to prostitute yourself. And when you look it up, though, in modern Bible dictionaries, it'll make the claim that it means sexual immorality. So, for example, you could go to Bible Hub here, and then you just go to a verse where you would find the term. For example, let's just go to Revelation chapter number 17. And then here you can see up here the punishment of the great prostitute, that this is G4204 pornes. So it's a feminine of pornos. And here it says the kings of the earth were sexually immoral with her. So just going through Revelation 17 will show you, though, that this doesn't mean that there is an actual woman that had sex with the kings of the earth, because it says that this woman is a city. So if you go to a Bible dictionary, and for example, I downloaded a few here, I put them in a folder. Like I have Strong's Greek Lexicon, Thayer's, Shrevelius Greek Lexicon. You find all that stuff online, and you can just download it as a PDF. And then what you would do is you would just find the Strong's number, and it's also ordered according to the Greek alphabet. So all you'd have to do is find out the order of the Greek alphabet, and you could just take a look for yourself. But in this case, you already know it's Strong's number 4204 as far as pornes goes. Okay, so here we're at 4027. All right, 42. There you go. Porneia 4202. Let me zoom in. Porneia from 4203, harlotry, including adultery and incest. Figuratively, idolatry, fornication. Now, the interesting thing is, for example, that this word it says here it means fornication. Fornication is not an English word. It's actually a Latin term. And this comes from the Latin Vulgate, which Jerome translated. And the interesting thing is that sometimes he translated porneia as fornication, and sometimes, so it's fornicatio, okay, and sometimes as prostitutio, which it actually means. As you see down here, that in 4205, pornos, so that is the whore, the male whore, that it comes from 4097. So let's just jump up to 4097 real quick. 4081. In this video, probably it's also good for people who are not used to using these lexicons. You have to be careful with the meaning that they say a certain word has. You will find that out today when we look at some other words. But, you know, it's good if a Christian starts busying himself with these lexicons and, you know, with interlinear Bibles, seeing where words are used in other verses and all that kind of stuff. So, 4097, piprasco, and it means to traffic, dispose of as merchandise or into slavery, to sell. So that's why I picked 1 Corinthians 7:23. We should not become slaves of man, because we were bought with a price. So if you sell yourself into slavery like a prostitute does, then you take money or other benefits that you get for committing the act, and you give something away from you. So prostitution isn't necessarily selling yourself for sex. That's one thing that we can pull out of this, and we're going to take a look at this, that is actually the case. But fornication itself in Latin is derived from a Latin word for an arch bow, because that's where the prostitutes used to hang out. That's what they claim, okay? I personally am always trying to be careful with anything that explains the meaning of a word from outside of the Bible. Like, for example, with this prostitution, so this porneia here, what I have done, okay, so take a look at this. Where did I put this? I think I put it under porneia. Well, first of all, here is where the meaning is derived from, that it refers to sexual immorality. That's actually a guy named Augustine of Hippo. It says his views strongly influenced how later Christians thought about sex. Yeah, he says, well, let's go up here. The early church's statements on marital affairs mainly concerned acceptable reasons for divorce and remarriage, and after his life, so Paul, the church felt that celibacy was more virtuous and liberating. This focus came about because the early church was very ascetic, possibly due to the influence of Greek philosophical thought. So that's what really happens. It actually doesn't have anything to do with the congregation or the assembly that followed Jesus, like Paul was from that, but of those who took over and brought in the philosophy that Paul actually warned about. So, and then Augustine of Hippo, it says down here, he was deeply suspicious of sexual passion, and this has influenced the outlook of all the major Christian denominations down to the present day. So again, this talks about the church system. And it's because that guy actually developed most of the theology that you hear preached in almost any church you could go to in the West, at least. And so, as far as Augustine goes, he had a contemporary called Jerome, and in his youth, he was drawn to Manichaeanism, which is Gnosticism, and Gnosticism actually says that the material world is evil and the immaterial world is good, and then kind of the thought that flows from that is that sex is evil, women are evil. You find that also in Tertullian's writings already, that having sex inside a marriage is already fornication. And what he means by that is sexual immorality again. So this whole thought comes actually out of these Gnostic, these philosophers' ideas, and not from the Bible. Because as you will see today, the Bible does not make that connection. The Bible refers to it as selling out, and for the benefit of something else, exchanging what's God's, and that's primarily your own service. Okay, what you were bought for with a price, selling out in that regard. So here again, porneia, prostitution. This is from Wikipedia, right? Sexual immorality, yeah. And this is what I told you in Latin. The term fornix means arch or vault. Okay, so it says the Oxford Dictionary records a figurative use as well, the forsaking of God for idols. That's actually in the Bible the primary meaning, also in the Old Testament. I had found, let me see if I find it right away. I had found an article by somebody. Here he is, Kyle Harper. Okay, so he writes an article on this word, porneia. And this is just outrageous. I mean, he says, porneia, the making of a Christian sexual norm. So you're thinking, oh, cool. Now it's going to get interesting. So he says, well, this Gregory, there were the two Gregories, and who contributed to this Trinitarian dogma of Constantinople. And he talks about one of these Gregories here, and he quotes him, and yada, yada, yada. So again, one of the church fathers' influence. But one of the interesting things here is that the Hebrew scriptures created an enduring association between sexual sin and idolatry. Actually, that's not true either, because it doesn't talk about sexual sin, but it talks about prostitution. And the claim here is made that later on, I thought I would have marked this out, but if you look for this article, you find it. The claim is made that in the Septuagint, in the book of Hosea, so in the times of Hosea, it says that porneia was given this notion that it refers to forsaking yourself, forsaking the Lord for other gods. Yeah. So before I prove to you that that's not the case, mark also that it says in Hellenistic Judaism we witness a widening of the term's meaning to indicate sexual acts of male commission and to include virtually any form of prohibited sexual relationship. So, Hellenistic Judaism. That's where the association of porneia with sexual sins really comes from. So yeah, here Gregory of Nyssa is mentioned. Let me see. Well, here is one of these other terms, moicheia, which means adultery or an adulteress. And we'll take a look at this one as well. I just don't want to miss something that I saw in this text here. Okay. For all the importance of prostitution in Greek and Roman societies, porneia was not a common word. Interesting, right? Porneia occurs in only 4 classical authors. Whatever. This meager harvest strongly suggests that porneia was not a common term before Judaism and Christianity infused it with new meaning. Because it means to prostitute yourself. It means to sell yourself. Let me go on here. For example, in Exodus 34:15, and this is way before the time of Hosea. It says, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land and play the harlot with their gods. Okay, so Exodus was way before the days of Hosea. Exodus 34:16, and take of his sons, of his daughters for your sons, and play the harlot, his daughters, with their gods. Okay, so it means forsaking the Lord in exchange for these pagan gods in order to have some benefit out of that. See, in Leviticus 17:7, it even says, and no, they shall offer more their sacrifices, and they shall no longer offer their sacrifices to demons, after whom they have prostituted themselves. Yeah. Let's just take a brief look and see if that uses the word porneia. Leviticus 17 verse 7, so you go to studybible.info/interlinear, which is the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. You see I had 1 Corinthians 6 open here. before we go to Leviticus. Let's just look at this. Do you not know that the unjust shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be misled, neither, and here it is, fornicators, right? The sexual immoral, supposedly. So let's open this thing up here. Okay, then we can take a look at that term later on. And here now, what we'll do is we'll just say, go to Leviticus 17, verse 7. Leviticus 17, verse 7. So let's go, so take a look at this now. Leviticus 17, verse 7, and they shall not sacrifice still their sacrifices to the vain gods in which they fornicate. And here is your word, porneia, in there. So it's actually a lie to say that porneia, that the association came in the days of Hosea, because porneia was used for a Hebrew term, and this always referred to Israel forsaking their God in exchange for demons or pagan gods, whatever you want to call them. Those actually are demons. That's what the Bible teaches. So with porneia in the New Testament, you see there's, well, for pornos, there's 10 occurrences. Okay, so this would be a male fornicator. You could then take a look and see how many female prostitution, how many words you have. Yeah, harlot. Okay, and you can do the same thing for G4203, for example. 8 occurrences. Yeah, to fornicate as the verb, to sell out. Yeah. You see here it's in Revelation 17 and 18, the whore of Babylon. And finally, G4202, 26 occurrences in the New Testament. Now, the nice thing about the Apostolic Bible Polyglot is that you can say, show me all the usages also in the Old Testament. And here you see something interesting now. This is from the story of Tamar. So Tamar was the wife of who was Judah's firstborn. So Judah, who came from Jacob, yeah, the progenitor of the tribe of Judah. So you know that the Lord killed and then Onan was supposed to raise seed unto his brother, which is the levirate marriage law that was actually formulated later in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, but you can see that that custom predated it actually. And Onan, you know, he didn't do it. He let it fall on the floor, lest Tamar would get pregnant. And then Tamar actually wanted to have offspring, though. And so Jacob said, yeah, once their younger brother has grown up, I'll give him to you and then you can have children. But she didn't want to wait for so long. And so she actually dressed up as a harlot. Maybe we should go there real quick. Genesis 38. Because it shows you that this term actually just means prostitute. You know, many say, well, this refers to a temple prostitute. Okay, maybe in these extra biblical writings, yeah, and maybe that is even true. I don't want to debate that, but when you look at the Bible, it actually refers to a prostitute, and not a temple prostitute. Yeah? Because this all blurs the meaning of the word. So, here's the story with and Onan. Let's see. Tamar. Oh yeah, here it is. When Judah saw her, he thought that she was a harlot, because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, please let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, what will you give me that you may come into me? So it's obvious what's happening here. Yeah. And then he goes into her, and so the story goes. But then when you now go back here to where we were, when they found her, okay, they wanted to actually kill her because they said she has a child out of harlotry in the womb. And that was actually the son, though, of Jacob. So it didn't mean temple prostitution. She was simply dressing up as a prostitute. Here, your sons will be fed in the wilderness 40 years, and they shall bear your harlotry until whenever should be consumed your carcasses in the wilderness. That's the meaning of the term. A very interesting passage is in Isaiah chapter 57. Let's go there. And then let's also go to Isaiah 57 here. But come here, you sons of the sorceress, you offspring of the adulterer and the harlot. Whom do you ridicule? Against whom do you make a wide mouth, and stick out the tongue? Are you not children of transgression, offspring of falsehood? Inflaming yourselves with gods under every green tree, slaying the children in the valleys under the clefts of the rocks. Among the smooth stones of the stream is your portion. They are your lot. Even to them you have poured out a drink offering, you have offered a grain offering. Should I receive comfort in these? So you can see here that they were inflaming themselves with their gods, under the trees. So this was the porneia, the act of it. And they gave them offerings, something in exchange to pay for services heaped upon them by those demons or other gods. And then it says, on a lofty and high mountain you have set your bed, even there you went up to offer sacrifice. Also behind the doors and their posts you have set up your remembrance, for you have uncovered yourself to those other than me. And have gone up to them, you have enlarged your bed and made a covenant with them. You have loved their bed, where you saw their nudity, and went to the king with ointment, and increased your perfumes. You sent your messengers far off, and even descended to Sheol. Why am I saying that this is a super important passage? It is because it actually talks about the bed in here, and the covenant that these people made with these strange gods. You have gone to bed with others than essentially your God. Now, going to Isaiah 57 here in the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, you will see a word in here which is very interesting. It's called koite. I talked about it last time. So it means the bed, right? And if you click this word, you will see that in the New Testament it occurs 4 times, right? So, bed, marriage bed, beds, marriage bed. It's rather interesting to note the way this is translated, because everything is given this sexual connotation over and over again, because like I told you, it comes from this Augustinian sex theology, whatever you want to call it, and essentially out of Gnosticism. So it doesn't have anything to do with God, what the guy says. So for example, when you go to Romans 13:13, let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust. Okay, so going back to here, if you open this up, it says not in lasciviousness and beds. So they translated the word koite as lust here, even though it doesn't mean lust. It just means a bed. Now, the claim is made that, well, I'd have to show you why they're saying this. So if you look at this here, bed, the marriage bed, repeated immoral sexual intercourse. Nowhere does the Bible say that it means that. It just means bed. we'll look at this meaning here a little later as well, by implication the male sperm, okay? So they're saying it means illicit sexual intercourse because it's in Romans 13:13. And then in Romans 13:13, they just translate it as lust. Whereas it just means bed or a resting place. And I prepared a little something here for you. Koite, Romans 13 verse 13. So this is arsenokoites. So for example here, the word koite is contained in here. Since the fathers fell asleep. Okay, so it's a place of resting, a place to lie down. It actually means to lie down because it comes from the word kemai, which can also mean to appoint. That was significant last time. The law can be appointed to somebody, laid on somebody. 1 Timothy 1 verse 9. And similarly here, couches, right? Beds and couches. So this is a similar term here that it uses in Acts 5:15. And in the Old Testament, in Micah, for example, they came devising troubles and working evils on their beds. So the koite, Hosea 7:14, they yelled out no more to me with their hearts, but only shrieked, what is that? In their beds. Be angry and sin not. What you say in your hearts, upon your beds let be waxed. Okay? So it means bed. And that's what Romans 13:13 is trying to tell you. Because if you look at, let's look at the context. Let's say 9 through 15. Knowing the time that now it is high time to awake out of the sleep, yeah. For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Therefore let us cast off the works of darkness, and let's put on the armor of light. Let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in resting. Okay, it's actually quite simple. You shouldn't be just hanging out in your bed all day long. It doesn't say you will go to hell when you do it, but it just says, and it reasons here why you should do that, because it's high time to awake out of the sleep. The night is far spent. Let's cast off works of darkness and put on the armor of light. You know, like, let's go to work. Don't hang out in your bed. Don't get drunk all the time. What for? Yeah. Because there is work to do. That's what it means. And the misleading thing, though, is, I think, that this word only occurs 4 times in the New Testament. And they're just claiming, oh, it means sexual immorality. And then they twist the scriptures to say that, lust. And here's the thing, why the connection between koite and lust is also false. It is because okay, well, we'd have to go back here to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Because here, the reason for getting married is in here. It says, if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. Yeah? It says, do not deprive one another except with consent, for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together, so that Satan doesn't tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So this burning desire, which is a lack, you cannot exercise this self-control, is not a sin in itself, the Bible says. It says, though, when you have that, then marry a woman and fulfill that duty, which is sex, okay? So it would be a flat-out Bible contradiction if the Bible would say in Romans 13:13, oh, by the way, don't have sex in the daytime. Yeah. So the next instance here where it's used is in Hebrews 13 verse 4. Okay, so it says, supposedly, Marriage is honorable in all, and the marriage bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Okay? So again, it gives you this strong sense that this has something to do with sex again. Going to Hebrews 13 in the New King James. Let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so some have unwillingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do with me? So it gives you the impression by this translation that it refers to the span of time that you are married to somebody. Yeah? Like our marriage. For example, I am married, I have 2 children. Like if I would mean the time span of me having been married, and I would start talking about my or our marriage. Yeah? Our marriage was good, our marriage was bad, our marriage this, that, and the other. Yeah? So it reads as if the author of Hebrews says, hold the marriage honorable among all. Well, first of all, not all those Christians were married. That's one important thing. Marriage, as we read, was supposed to be avoided because it creates a conflict of interest, and it's only to be done in case you cannot exercise the self-control and live without sex, because people went to prostitutes all the time who became believers because they wanted sex. And so Paul said, hey, don't be doing that. Get married instead if you can't control yourself. But then you have the conflict of interest that you want to please your wife, or that the wife wants to please the husband. So this word, though, which is translated here as marriage, and I will show this to you, is G1062, gamos, and it actually refers to the wedding feast. Yeah? It doesn't refer to the time span of being married, yeah, like, oh, our marriage, but it says, if we go back here, the marriage feast, to hold that honorable among all. And you see in the occurrences where Jesus said, in Matthew 22, he gave a parable of this wedding that somebody made for his son and so forth. The wedding where he turned water into wine, and then in Revelation 19, the wedding feast of the Lamb. Okay, so it refers to the actual wedding feast that is approaching, because we have been betrothed to one future husband. And Paul says that in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 2. He said to the Corinthians, I am jealous for you with godly jealousy, for I have betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. So this is the background. You see how it also uses this language here? A virgin. Chastity. Yeah? It doesn't mean that we're going to meet Jesus and have, what I mean, with him. But it means that we have been betrothed to him in a spiritual sense, and we shouldn't be selling ourselves to man, other systems, like religions, the world. James 4, verse 4, you adulterers and adulteresses, know you not that friendship with the world is enmity with God. Okay? So when you make friends with something that goes against the Bible, even when it's your church or your theology school, like anything where you bend and twist yourself to a behavior or a conduct that you normally would not have, if it's, let's say, on Sunday when you go to your church place, you turn into this church person. right? And, well, now I got to be careful what I say. Now I got to this, that. Like people who pervert themselves in order to be accepted by others on Sunday. That, for example, would be porneia, because you're selling out so that you have social acceptance. You're paying a price. Yeah, you're giving away from God. Like, for example, you know that certain things they teach there or say there are anti-Bible, but you're choosing not to say something because, you could lose your friends, your family, so you choose to stay. That's porneia. You sold your vessel. And this is going to be a verse that we're going to be looking at as well. So let me just open it right now, that chapter. But, so the gamos, okay, the marriage, the wedding feast. And we arrive there from this other occurrence of koite, yeah, only 4 occurrences in the New Testament. So the koite, of course, is also, so you're supposed to keep that undefiled. Yeah, you're going to a gamos, a wedding feast. So in that sense, as we saw that in Isaiah chapter 57, let's see if I can find it real quick. Well, we already looked at it before, so I think you got the idea. Well, yeah, here it is. Okay. Upon mountain the high and elevated, there is your bed. There you hold sacrifice. You hold to sacrifice your sacrifices. Yeah, and it said that they sacrificed it unto their gods. And, they poured out drink offerings and all that stuff. The bed, okay? That's what it talks about in Hebrews 13, verse 4. It doesn't have anything to do with your marriage and that you keep that clean and not have, the idea is probably, well, don't do this type of sex, don't do that type of sex. Like they want to get into your private life. And then they have all this marriage counseling going on because obviously their Augustinian theology doesn't work. It's very destructive on people, on the soul, because people are constantly shamed for doing something that God does not condemn in the Bible. For example, having sex that's actually fun, right? The whole Song of Solomon is about sex. I remember the other day there was a German free evangelical, and he was saying, well, the more important thing in the Song of Solomon is the spiritual meaning as between the church and Jesus. And I'm just saying, no, it's not. It doesn't open up by saying, well, this is actually a spiritual meaning here and all this type of stuff. But the whole book is very, very, very detailed about physical pleasure, having sex. I gotta take a small break here because after 40 minutes, this thing stops. So, but people can't handle it because they've been told also by these mistranslations, like I showed you, like the New Testament always condemns having sex. No, it doesn't. Yeah, it's Augustinian theology, and the Bible meaning is changed by these translators, as I have showed you. So enough for this koite meaning here. There is actually another interesting one. I think I just closed this by accident here. Let's go back. Okay. Romans 9 verse 10. This is a very, very interesting occurrence. I'm not done researching this one. Let's go there. Romans chapter 9. So this is about Rebekah and Isaac. Here, okay, well, it starts with Abraham, right? It says, in Isaac your seed shall be called. So it's about this promise, right? That is, those who are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as the seed. For this is the word of promise, at this time I will come and Sarah shall have a son. So there was a word of promise, right? God made an appointment. You remember that kemai means to appoint. And then it says, not only this, but when Rebekah had conceived by one man, even our father Isaac, and then it puts those brackets here, because it's just such weird Greek grammar in the first place. I've been reading about this. There's whole theological papers on this verse here, this passage. But here, this to have conceived has this word koite. Not only this, but also Rebekah having koite from out of one, our father Isaac. So they're saying, well, she conceived out of Isaac, and koite means to conceive, or the sperm. And the reason why they're claiming this is because in the Old Testament, so let's see, let's go to, let me think. I gotta figure out the correct verse. I believe it's in Judges. Judges 21:12. Oh, yeah. Sanctified, holy, and anointed as upon him. Oh, it went to Leviticus. Judges. Okay. Here it is. So women not having known koite arsenos, right? So this actually means being in bed with men. So they haven't had sex, okay? Koite arsenos. There is other instances, though, in the Old Testament, and now I think I know where it was, but this is going to be quicker, more precise if I take this route. It was a 5 verse 14. That's what I remember. I think in Numbers, right? Yes, there it is. Okay, so here you have koite spermatos. So the connection they make between this and that is that, well, maybe this is just a shortening, yeah, of koite spermatos, because spermatos is the seed. Well, the spermatos, though, can also just mean your offspring. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the physical offspring, like you see in the levirate marriage, and where Onan is supposed to raid sperm to his brother and he doesn't want to do it because he knew that this sperm wouldn't be his, so the offspring. But the contrast, though, when you want to show that it actually is the physical sperm from the sexual intercourse, then they call this koitein spermatos. You see that here? Maybe we have to go. Let's pick the Brenton Septuagint and go to that verse. Numbers 5. Shall lie with her carnally, they say. Yeah. So it actually means going to bed, having sex, and actually having the sperm involved in the end. Yeah. And gave any of his marriage. Okay. So it doesn't say it here, but this is where they get the idea from that koite here refers to the conception of the sperm. Well, I will give you one hint why I don't think that that's the case. Because it talks about election here and about God's purpose and plan. And it says that God gave Abraham a promise, and it says, this is the word of promise. At this time I will come, and Sarah shall have a son. And then it says, look at this, not only this, but when Rebekah also had, and then you have to go back here in the interlinear to see this. Just give me 1 second. Let's just open up here. Romans 9 verse 10. Not only this, but also Rebekah, from out of one koite, had Isaac, the father of us. Okay, so they would say, but also Rebekah, from out of one, Isaac our father, had conceived. That's how they would translate this. But if you take the koite, because it's an all great stem from Kemai, right? If you take that as referring to the appointment, meaning this is the word of promise, right? Then the meaning shifts. Not only this, not only Sarah had this promise, had Isaac promised, but also Rebekah, from out of one appointment promise, had Isaac our father. Because to have a husband is actually also expressed by this same word here, which is echo. And so this would mean then that in Romans 9 verse 10, it doesn't talk about conception and sperm by koite, but it talks about a divine appointment. Yeah, and you can go back to Genesis 24, I believe, is where it is. And it should be towards, let's see. Okay, so he says, right, this man that is being sent to find a wife for Isaac, he says to God before, okay, whoever comes and gets me water, hold on. Here it is. Behold, I stand by the well of the water, and it shall come to pass that when the virgin comes out to draw water, and I say to her, please give me a little water from your pitcher to drink, and she says, drink, and I will draw for your camels also, let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. And exactly that is what happens later. She comes with the pitcher, okay, and then he actually knows that, Abram's servant heard their words. He worshipped the Lord, bowing himself to earth, because he knew that this was appointed from God, because this was the rule that was laid out before. So Rebekah also, by one appointment, had Isaac our father, exactly in the same manner as Sarah had Isaac as her son. This talks about Isaac, this passage. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm still here in Genesis 24. Romans 9 is where we were. Yeah? In Isaac, your seed shall be called. Yeah? So, not just Sarah had Isaac by a promise, by an appointment from God, but also Rebekah. So this now severely limits, or it actually totally destroys that koite. How do I get back there? Here it is. That koite has any meaning to do with sex in the New Testament. And that I find very interesting. Yeah? Because I've shown that in Hebrews 13:4, it doesn't refer to the act of sex in the bed, or the sex bed, however you want to term that. In Romans 13:13, it doesn't. In Luke 11 verse 7, which is this. Don't furnish me weariness, the door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. Okay, yeah. So that's, when the guy knocks on the door and says, hey, I need your help, and he says, well, don't worry me, I'm already in my bed. With my children, right? It doesn't refer to sex either. It's just a bed, okay? So it's a bed or an appointment. But they're translating it so that it always has this sex meaning attached to it. And then they shame the people with these passages, do their marriage counseling sessions, and essentially destroy male Christians and marriages. I mean, I've seen that happen because of this Augustinian false theology. So let's go to 1 Thessalonians. Thessalonians 4. And this is where you have the word porneia. Hold on. G4202. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 3. For this is the will of God, even your sanctification, that you should abstain from fornication. So again, the notion is that this talks about you being holy, and holiness then is equated with, not being sexually immoral. First of all, holiness means to be separate, to be used by God. So it means don't cling on to a system like the church system, which created their dogmas that then you have to defend, and give up on defending the Bible alone. Because, and this is in the manual of the UPCI church, for example. It says that their pastors are not allowed to talk about divisive issues. So they have to sell themselves from a holy drive to figure out truth, like the Bereans did it, because it's divisive, right? So that's what it really means. And you can prove this because it says here, and this is by Paul, finally then, brethren, we urge and exhort you in the Lord Jesus that you should abound more and more, just as you received from us, how you ought to walk and please God. For you know what commandments we gave you through the Lord Jesus. For this is the will of God, your sanctification, so that you become separate for God, okay? So that He can use you, so that you're undefiled. You haven't sold yourself to anybody else, anything else. You don't have any stakes somewhere else. Because Paul was not married. Yeah, you received from us how you ought to walk and please God. You should abound more and more, just as you received from us how you ought to walk and to please God. It's not like all these Thessalonians were married and he's like, okay, well, now let me lecture you what you're supposed to do in bed. Yeah? And you can prove this further because in verse number 6 it says that no one take advantage of and defraud his brother in this matter. If you go to the interlinear Bible, which is always very helpful to understand, you go to the interlinear Bible and you compare usages of a term in other verses. This is how you look this stuff up if you want to understand what's going on. I need a verse now. Okay. 1 Thessalonians 4. Oh, I went down too far. Okay. To not pass over and to overabound in the matter of his brother. Okay. To overabound. To take advantage of. To overreach. To defraud. Yeah. Paul says that he never did that with others. Here, did I overreach you by any of them whom I sent to you? Like, did I ever take advantage of you? Okay. So, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it talks about something where you potentially take advantage and defraud your brother if you do this stuff here, whatever it is. And you should abstain from porneia, selling yourself. Okay, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. The will of God, you're, okay, setting apart. Don't sell yourself to nobody. And to be at distance with porneias, selling, from Piprasco G 4097, to sell into slavery. Merchandise, right? You're making merchandise out of yourself. Okay, to know for each of you his own vessel, yeah, that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust like the Gentiles who know not God. So what they would say is that this means You should possess your own wife, in holiness and honor, and don't have sex with passion of lust. That again goes against 1 Corinthians 7 verse 9, because if you don't have the burning desire, don't get married. If you have it, don't separate yourself except for a time to give yourself over to prayer and fasting, but then come back together so that the devil cannot tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Okay? And so Paul isn't contradicting himself. He doesn't say, well, don't have sex in passion of lust like the Gentiles who don't know God, because God wants you to be sanctified, which means that you abstain from sexual immorality. So apparently having a passionate form based on lust of sex, in their eyes, is sexual immorality, even though the whole Song of Solomon is about it. I mean, it simply doesn't make sense. Also, like I said, because Paul wasn't married, and what does this have to do with defrauding and taking advantage of your brother? No. What it really means is, because the vessel here doesn't refer to your wife either. That is the next lie. They pull this out of 1 Peter 3 verse 7, because it says that likewise your husbands dwell with them, your wives, according to knowledge, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel. Yeah? It doesn't mean that your wife is your vessel. It just says that the wife is the weaker vessel. Now, what is a vessel? You see that here. It's something that God can use. Acts 9 verse 15. The Lord said to him, go, for he, and that is Paul, is a chosen vessel to me, to bear my name before the nations. That's what it actually means. You can also, well, we'll do that in a second. We'll look at the vessel in 2 Timothy chapter 2 here in a second. But, so the vessel refers to how you can give yourself over to God for use, so he can fill you with something, okay, and use you. He's the potter, you're the vessel. That's the idea behind it. And so you should possess your own vessel. So me, Andre, what I do for God, I should take that in possession, in separation and honor, so that God can use it. I shouldn't sell myself out to any of those systems so that I am not of use anymore, because then it's stained, then it's defiled in God's eyes. I'm not keeping the gamos, the wedding feast, in honor, and the koite, the appointment, the bed, which because I've been betrothed to one husband. So this all plays together, because I've been betrothed to one husband as a chaste virgin. Are you starting to understand how significant it is to look at this whole teaching and what Augustine did, and that this is clearly a sign of satanic behavior, because it destroys marriages, it destroys Christian men, and essentially drives away a lot of people from God, because they get angry at God and they say, well, you're saying if I'm married, this, that, and the other in the Bible, but then you're saying I shouldn't be doing this, that, and the other, and I'm not allowed to do it based on fun or, They see contradictions in the Bible all over the place when you see it through that lens. And God doesn't contradict himself. So, passion of lust is exactly how these people conduct their service for God. Yeah, when they're singing like, they're all in ecstasy with their pop music. They're all lustfully serving God. Yeah, they're calling that, well, we're joyful servants of the Lord, but in reality, they're building the system that actually requires others to sell out, to become a whore in a spiritual sense. Yeah, and then this passion of lust, allowing your vessel to be used in passion of lust because you sold yourself, so now you're immersing yourself into the passion instead, because you need a replacement now, so that it feels good, right? I feel holy now. I'm closing my eyes, I'm all crying, it's all, wow, Jesus, and I'm lifting my hands, and this is what it talks about. And not the whole passage doesn't have anything to do with sex. And this is how you take advantage and defraud your brother when you behave in a manner like that, because they drop you like a hot iron the minute that you start criticizing their form of passionate, lustful worship and selling out. Do you understand? That's how they defraud and take advantage of other Christians. If you now go to 2 Timothy, and this is just to show you this vessel thing, chapter 2. So, shun profane and idle babblings, for they will increase the more ungodliness. Their message will spread like cancer. Hymenaeus and Philetus are of this sort, who have strayed concerning the truth, saying that the resurrection is already past, and they overthrow the faith of some. Nevertheless, the solid foundation of God stands, having this seal: the Lord knows those who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honor, some for dishonor. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself of the latter, so anyone would refer to a vessel. You're a vessel. You're part of the anyone that wants to be gold and silver. Yeah, you cleanse yourself from the latter. What were the latter? Those vessels for dishonor. Yeah, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified, set apart, because you're cleansing yourself from those, and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. Flee also youthful lusts, okay, which means, refers to the covetousness. I want a position in the church. I want a bachelor degree in theology. I so much enjoy my service here in the church as a pastor. You know, it's lusting, coveting these positions in this system that makes it look like this Christian life on earth is fun and free of persecution. And it's not. You know, clearly the Bible teaches that you have to die to self and hand yourself over to God to allow him to use you. But this whole system is just all about advancing yourself inside the church system to get a position so that you're allowed to speak in the pulpit, whereas all men should exercise their priesthood and speak. You know, in some form. Yeah, bring a psalm, bring a teaching, discern a spirit, something like that. It's not just reserved for those who make sure that they defend the dogma of the club and keep quiet on certain issues. Yeah, unity in essentials, and like all this talk of the Freemasons, the Nicolaitans, those who overcame the people of God by their clergy. That's who they sell out to in order to have this fellowship. And this will disqualify you from partaking in the actual wedding feast of the Lamb, because you're supposed to keep yourself chaste for that. So that's the real meaning behind it. And that's why I'm saying why this is so important. They make these people appear so super holy because, they didn't have sex before marriage, they don't masturbate, they, like all these things in the book where from Augustine on, they said, well, really also sex in marriage is already kind of fornication, so, it's crazy. And then in reality, they exactly trespass in that manner. And that is a satanic trick. So you see here that this is what the vessels are. And when you go now back to 1 Thessalonians 4, and, study this, and you'll find that I'm telling you the truth. This is the will of God, that you set yourself apart, that you're separate. Yeah, sanctification, that's what it means. That you should abstain from selling out. That each of you knows how to possess his own vessel, how God can use me. Clean yourself from that. separate yourself from these vessels of dishonor. Don't have a style of passionate lust when you serve God, like the Gentiles who don't know God, and that you shouldn't take advantage and defraud your brother in this matter. You know, I could just go on and on and on. Start delving into this. You'll be surprised what you find. Let's go to the adulteress. I told you that this is also in James, right? You adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship with the world is enmity against God? Now, I'm not promoting adultery, by the way. If a man has intercourse with a married woman, that is still considered adultery. Don't do it, okay? But in James 4 verse 4, it does not refer to that. It refers to being a friend of the world and commit adultery against the husband you're betrothed to, because you are going to a marriage feast, okay? You're invited. Keep yourself clean from the world, from those who say, well, you know, you don't really have to talk about that, but, you know, if you keep quiet on these certain issues, maybe you can get a position in the church, maybe you can preach here and all this type of stuff. That's how it works. And they put this in nicer words so that you will swallow it easier than I just demonstrated it. Believe me that. So like in Isaiah 57, right, with the koite, the bed, here is this word adulteress as well. It's in Jeremiah 6:29. The bellows failed at the fire, failed the lead. Okay, so this is contaminated metal element, yeah, the lead. And it's not the same word as the adulteress, but it's interesting because it has a similar root. Yeah, it's 34:32. And the interesting thing I find is that in Zechariah 5 verse 7, a talent of lead was lifted away and a woman sat in the midst of the measure basket. Okay, so that is a round talent of lead. Now it gets super interesting. Okay, check this out. Zechariah 5. Zechariah 5. Because this talks about unrighteousness. Okay. Verse 6. What is this? It is a basket that's going forth. This is their resemblance throughout the earth. Here is a lead disc lifted up, and this is a woman sitting inside the basket. And then he said, this is wickedness or lawlessness, right? And he thrust her down into the basket and drew the lead cover over its mouth. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and there were two women coming with the wind in their wings, for they had wings like that, like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between earth and heaven. So I said to the angel, talk to me, where are they carrying the basket? And he said to me, to build a house for it in the land of Shinar, and the Septuagint translates this as Babylon. When it is ready, the basket will be set there on its base. So, this vision talks about this whore system, this whore of Babylon, this unrighteousness. And the interesting thing here is that it uses, first of all, a derived term, lead, yeah, contamination, okay, unclean, that is related to adultery. You know that the whore of Babylon is a porne who commits fornication with the kings of the earth. It's a city. And when you now go to, let's see, the interlinear Hebrew Bible, let's see, where is it? Berean interlinear, here, interlinear chapters. And you only find this when you have a holy zeal and drive to try to figure out the Bible. That's how you find this stuff. Zechariah, hold on. And that's what's supposed to happen when you assemble. You're supposed to bring this stuff and say, hey, brothers and sisters, look what I found. And then they're supposed to evaluate that and say, well, yeah, I see that too, but did you also see this part? Or you were missing something here? Or, well, I don't think your connection is quite correct. You know, that kind of spiritual exchange is supposed to happen between all the priests, all the believers. And that doesn't happen on those Sundays. There's a guy talking in the front, then you open a book and sing a few songs from those pages, and then you go home. It's certainly not the ecclesia, but it's, like I said before, it's Circe, and I'm going to show you something very interesting now here. Zechariah 5, because this word this is their resemblance, sitting a woman. Okay, a lead disc. Okay, so lead, this was the word that was related to the word for adultery, this moi choi. I'm sorry. The disc that it's made of is actually, in Hebrew, kikar. And you might be thinking, oh, I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong one. You might be thinking, well, why is that significant? Well, you'll see in a second. Kikar, a round district, a round loaf, a round weight, a talent. It actually means a circle. And, well, let's see, do we have that here in the Brown's Dictionary somewhere? Circle. From karar, a circle. Round loaf. So it's like Circe, the goddess that gave birth to the term church. It's exactly the same thing as here used in Zechariah 5, kind of hidden, but when you know what you're looking at, it's kikar in Hebrew, describing this adulterous woman, yeah, this unrighteousness, this unclean lead, who was taken to have a house built for her in Babylon. Do you see how the circle, full circle, closed? Looking at those scriptures, what all this actually means is that this anti-God system that Augustine heavily promoted, and he gave it the theology, that this has exchanged the actual meaning by glossing it over for porneia and all those things, with it referring to sex within marriage or outside marriage or masturbation, in order to make people feel holy when they run to this church system and actually sell out themselves and committing exactly those sins that God tells us not to commit. Now, you could go through other scriptures. We'll probably do it in the future, like in 1 Corinthians 5, how there is one Christian who is having his father's wife as a harlot. So, he wants sex and he buys his dad's wife. And you can actually tell that the wife is not a Christian because she is not put out of the assembly. That would have been the consequence that Paul would have given to the guy. He says, you should have just put him out of your assembly. But she is not mentioned, so she was not a Christian. She was most likely a prostitute, or at least she did it for money for him. So he offered her money and did it with her. And they're making it again sound like he was a Christian who was having his father's wife as his wife. And that's not the meaning. Because they always need this sex thing attached to it, when in fact it talks about selling yourself. Okay. Let's see, do I want to mention something else? I got roughly 4 minutes left. No, you can, I would just advise you, well, yeah, here's one more thing. Esau, right? Porneia. That no one be an immoral or godless person like Esau. Okay, so here's this word porneia in there again. But it tells you in exactly the verse, and that's Hebrews 12, verse 16, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. So he inherited, by being the firstborn, the right to be, we wouldn't call them Israelites today. We would call them Edomites. I mean, they're still around, but that's a different topic. But, he sold that birthright because he didn't believe in God. He was godless. And it's not, He wasn't immoral, but he was a whore, a porne. He sold it. Yeah, I put this here. Profane person. Yeah. Worldly, because he was an unbeliever. Impure, unclean, not holy. Common. That's what Esau was. Like, I don't care. I don't believe in God anyway. I want to go hunting. Yeah, I'm hungry. Give me that soup. Yeah, you can have my birthright. I don't care. That's what he did. Yeah. He sold this birthright here. Who? For a meal. Sold. To give away. Yeah. He says, I don't need that. I don't care. And, you know, in that manner, you can go through all those verses. You know, and then you go to like these John MacArthur churches. Here's one offshoot in Berlin. This was in German, you know. Here, Daniel Willoughby, he was there. He's a deceiver, I can tell you that, from Biblical Ministries Worldwide. He planted those John MacArthur schools in Berlin and in Zurich, Switzerland. And so they were talking about porneia, like sexual immorality again. And they were also quoting Jesus as saying, you know, he who, well, this was in German, so he who is angry at his brother without cause. I think that's how Jesus said it. And he was just saying, well, he who is angry with his brother, and that's a sin, and he wouldn't cite this without cause of the verse. That was one thing that I didn't like, yeah, because you can get angry at your brother if you have a cause, and then you have to talk it over. And then I also wanted to mention that porneia is in Revelation 17, yeah, as prostitution, and is used like that in the Septuagint. And in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul tells us that we should keep our vessels in honor and be separate. And then, as soon as I wanted to type the next thing, they blocked me. Yeah? They hate the truth. I forgot who this guy was. Some American dude. You know, so they come to Germany, and then they spread all this poison, this spiritual poison, all over Germany. And I don't know. They will stand before God, and it won't be good for them. I can tell you that.